Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session titled Fostering Youth Voices from Intention to Impact. My name is Lamal Hamoui. I'm a journalist with Arab News in Saudi, and I'm going to be your moderator for this wonderful session. So, to kick things off, according to a global survey conducted by the MISC Foundation, 45% of youth identify as social change agents, and yet the clarity of their impact and changes at times remains elusive to us. In our session today, we're going to tackle a few different topics, and we're going to answer the questions, hopefully, of how can society foster an environment that encourages youthful inquiry, supports the pursuit of answers to humanity's challenges. We're also going to discuss what can we do now to create an ecosystem that accelerates the journey from innovative ideas to tangible societal benefits. Simply put, how can we empower the youth today to contribute meaningfully alongside experienced peers such that I have right now on stage with me to crafting the future of educational policies? To kick off this discussion, joining me in the session, I'd like to introduce firstly Mr. Andrew Baird, the CEO of EFE Global United States. We also have Professor Tan Eng Chai, the president of the National University of Singapore in Singapore. We also have Mr. Taro Fuji, the president of the University of Tokyo in Japan. And also, last but not least, Mr. Hadi Partovi, the CEO of Code.org in the United States. Can we give them all a round of applause? Wonderful. I'm personally really excited about this discussion. I had the opportunity to kind of meet with you a little bit before our session to kind of get some insight from you all. I don't have a background in education, so this is just very interesting for me to hear. To start off our session, I want you to give a brief explainer, just like you did to me, to our audience members. Tell us a little bit about what you do to support youth in education. Please, Mr. Andrew.
Great. Well, thank you for having us here today, and thanks to MISC for putting on this. I think I'll first start by just addressing the elephant in the room here, which is we're having a panel about youth without any youth on the panel, which is always a little embarrassing. But I'm happy to see that we have youth out here, and we're looking forward to engaging all of you in the discussions. So Education for Employment's focus is on providing opportunities for employment through training and skills building in the Middle East and North Africa. That's our geographic focus. We do that through a series of trainings in a variety of areas. We focus a lot on the soft skills development. I think sometimes we look at what we do as the bridge between education and employment. I'm sure we'll hear more from our esteemed colleagues, but what we find particularly common is that when youth do leave their educational settings, they're not necessarily prepared for entrepreneurship, for the workplace. They have lots of knowledge and maybe some skill sets, but there is still that missing element. So EFE is really focused on providing that bridge. We've successfully connected about 183,000 youth to employment since we began in 2006, and in a variety of sectors from hospitality to engineering, and most recently to AI. And the last thing I'll say is, we can come back to some of this. I think some of the programs that we really feel are beneficial are mentorship. It's been a demand that we have seen, and the real importance of providing role models and mentors. And so that's a growing area for us. The entrepreneurship training, and what we're hearing from our entrepreneurs, they don't just want to make money. They want to make change. They want to make social change in their communities. So I think we can talk more about that as well. And the last is what I mentioned earlier, really this focus on AI. So
It's wonderful. I am going to jump back to that idea, the mentorship and the importance of it. Let's go to Professor Tan. Can you please tell us what you're doing, some of the work that you're doing in the University of Singapore?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me in this panel. But first, perhaps I can give you a sense on the National University of Singapore, or NUS. It is one of the 6 universities or publicly supported university in Singapore. And we are the largest. I have 31,000 undergraduate students, 12,000 master students, and 4,000 PhD students. And we are supported by 3,000 faculty, 5,000 research staff, and 5,000 administrative staff. right? We are a research-intensive university, so we do win quite a lot of research grants, typically about 600 million US dollars a year in terms of research grant income, about 10% of which will come from the industry. And because of our research intensity, NUS is actually ranked fairly well. In the QS ranking, we are ranked number 8 in the world. In the Times Higher Education ranking, NUS is ranked number 19 in the world. And one of the important aspects of public universities is to ensure that our graduates have good employment outcomes. So every year, within 6 months, 95% of our graduates would be able to land a job, right? And in fact, in the Times Higher Education, we are ranked number 9 in the world on global employability. And this is a survey that they actually tap on the many companies all around the world. Like many universities, we focus on education and on research. But NUS is unique in a certain way that we have an enterprise arm. And I'd love to say more about the enterprise arm. The enterprise arm is an important arm of NUS. It is where we promote entrepreneurship. And this is where I think we expose our students to entrepreneurship, and we incubate the companies. And many of these companies do actually are set up for social impact. So I'd love to say a little bit more about NUS Enterprise.
It's wonderful. Mr. Taro, the president of the University of Tokyo in Japan, tell us about some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm from the University of Tokyo. So as you know, Tokyo is one of the sort of major universities in Japan, and also likewise, President Tan. We have around 28,000 students, half graduate, half undergrad. And so we are a kind of pretty much comprehensive universities. So we have 10 schools and 15 graduate schools and so on. And so, of course, we are doing research very much, and also like all these students are going over to used to be the kind of majority is going over to the government, and also like public sectors, and also big industries and so on. But the big change in these maybe 10 plus years is that there are quite a few students also who would like to start up something. And especially recently, they are very much aware of the importance of the social services and also care for the society, so that in coherence with the such kind of tendency. So as a university, we are also now promoting kind of social entrepreneurial activities of the students. And then I would like to, and then also, of course, this regular, startup domain, so we are also very active, so that I could also talk about all these topics more.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And Mr. Hadi, can you tell us some of the work that you're doing with CEO of Code.org?
Sure. Code.org is by the way, thank you for having me here. Code.org is a global nonprofit with the vision that every student in every school should have the opportunity to learn computer science as part of a foundational education in primary and secondary schools. And we started 10 years ago with the idea that in today's digitized world, for students, learning basic computer science is just as important and foundational as learning reading and writing and math, and even more important than many of the subjects that students learn in the primary and secondary education system. In the last 10 years in the United States, we've helped all 50 states roll out plans to teach computer science in schools, and we've also partnered with 80 different countries to roll out national plans to teach computer science. And we build the leading platform for teaching coding and computer science in schools with over 80 million students enrolled. Although 80 million students is still just scratching the surface of the 1.5 billion students globally that are basically learning in our primary and secondary education system globally. My general thought, by the way, is that we have this global, almost $10 trillion a year education system with 1.5 billion kids in it, and they graduate at the end of high school without the skills needed to actually be change makers or even get employed. And then we have organizations like EFE trying to add whatever is missing. And part of my goal is, why don't we figure out what's missing and put that in the school system? Yeah. We're spending trillions of dollars every year educating kids in the curriculum of the past, and we should teach them curriculum of the future, like computer science or artificial intelligence, digital skills, financial literacy, entrepreneurship, etc.
That perfectly brings me to my next question. I love how you introduced it for me. It's wonderful. What's really great about this panel is we have such experts from different varying backgrounds, and you bring such different perspectives, all under education. I do want to make one small note to our audience members. I'm gonna do my very, very best, I promise. They're also gonna give me a signal. I'm gonna give you the opportunity to ask questions at the end, so please keep that in mind. If they discuss anything that you want to know more about, please keep that question in mind, and inshallah at the end we're gonna have time for it. To kick things off, obviously there's a saying that we all know: children are the future, the youth are the future, and we have to invest in them. We have to invest in their curiosity. We have to give them the skill set that they need to challenge modern day issues that we're facing. I want to start off the conversation with Mr. Andrew. What strategies can be implemented to cultivate an environment that fosters youth inquiry and challenges and encourages them to address global issues?
Yeah. So I think the mantra that we use is meet youth where they are. So that means both physically, but also where they're interested. And I think what we find is, in the region that we work in, a lot of the educational systems are very top down. This is what you need to know, and we will teach it to you. And we're trying to look at ways to transform that and flip that. We talk often about flipping the classroom, but really have youth-driven, youth interest, and bring that into the forefront of how we run all of our training, so that we are first understanding where their interests are, matching that with where our opportunities are, and looking for ways to really kind of co-create their educational experience.
That's wonderful. Professor, I want to jump to you. Same questions. What strategies can we implement to cultivate and foster an environment for youth inquiry?
So if you look at Singapore, Singapore is a very small country. We're only 700 square kilometers. Our DNA, part of our DNA, it's that we always looked out. In the sense that if you look at Singapore, all our flights are international flights and no local flights. We have to go out, right? And we impress on our students that Singapore may not have the jobs for them, right? And they have to go out, and they have to actually to compete with others, right, in their respective countries. And if you can compete, then I think there's a good chance for you to survive. In Singapore, we have no natural resources, right? Only human beings, and that's why we put a lot of attention on education. Way back, about more than 20 years ago, we're looking at developments in the world, and we see actually the importance of innovation, right? But 20 years ago, there's no innovation ecosystem in Singapore, right? It is still very much driven by big national, multinationals, and very little of this budding startups. So we thought that it's useful for our students to have this experience of being in a startup. And then the best place to go is to go to Silicon Valley, right? We have actually experiential training as part of our educational framework. And we feel that experiential opportunities are very important for students to learn. I mean, learning does not have to be confined to the classroom. In fact, students learn more if actually they have opportunities to practice their skills. So we have internships, but usually in established companies. So in 2002, we sent our students to be interns in startups. So we started in Silicon Valley. Now there are 20 locations around the world where our students can go for a 6-month to a 1 full year of internship. And these are all fully credited, which means that they are not delayed in their graduation, right, because of that internship. over the last 20 years, we encourage students to start up companies, and many of these companies are also done for social good, right? So this is what we call social innovation, or innovation for social impact. So there are more than 1,100 companies. We don't send too many students because not every student would like to have such an experience. So every year we send about 400 students to about 20 locations around the world. And we graduated, say, up to 2023, about 4,000 such graduates. We call this program the NUS Overseas College Program, or the NOC program. And these graduates, they have actually set up about 1,100 startups. They have actually raised about 3.5 billion Singapore dollars, and 250 of them are startups meant for social good. All right. So within that ecosystem that we have built over the last 20 years, we provide actually a lot of mentorships. So in fact, over the last 20 years, you have many of the senior graduates who now actually are involved in the ecosystem as mentors to the junior systems. So it sort of helped to build itself, right? We have VCs, early stage VCs, other VCs in the ecosystem as well. They also provide mentorship at different stages of the startups.
Let's jump to Mr. Taro. Can you tell us, within the University of Tokyo in Japan, what are you doing to cultivate youth innovation to tackle social issues around the world?
Right. Yeah. So in the case of Japan, so it's kind of maybe it's a kind of good contrast with the Singapore. So we have sort of two steps, and first of all, we are like in Japan. So everybody's speaking Japanese, and then it's not like an English-speaking country. And then so for the student to have a look at all this, what's going on in global, in the global situation, and then they will need to also be aware of the importance of sharing such, global issues. And for that, what we need to do is to globalize all these students, and then put them into the global or international situation, environment. And so to do that, so this globalization is one step ahead. And then at the same time, we have already quite, nice entrepreneurial activities. But most of them are looking at the domestic business, so that in Japan. But then, so for now, we are trying to connect our ecosystem in Japan to the overseas ecosystems, and so that they could have a look at the kind of overseas market, and also the even they can, for example, they can have an opportunity, not in Japan, but in, for example, one of the African countries, and then so that they could make their business in there, so that it doesn't have to be in a domestic situation. So like this way, it's a kind of a two-step process. But so we do a lot of, we put a lot of effort to this entrepreneurial activities for the students from maybe around the year 2000 or a little bit later, but mostly kind of recently for the globalization of the startup activities. And then on top of it, so recently there are more and more students who like to do something good for the society, and especially for, outside Japan, or also even inside Japan. So, there was a kind of big, very big earthquake recently, or at the beginning of this year. And then, so the students are already kind of expressing their wish to help them out in that region. So that we are trying to think about how to coordinate their activities in there. But like this way, so also we had this East Japan great earthquake, and all these situations, the students are kind of really making a kind of immediate response to such kind of situations. But and then like this way, so they are very much aware of, they are doing something good for the society by themselves. And then that can be also the outside Japan. So that, for example, recently we are trying to make a kind of network of the people in the, for example, African countries, so that our students to students to be able to come to African countries, and then they could make a kind of collaborative initiative in there together with African students.
And lastly, Mr. Hadi, would you like to comment on this question?
Sure. I mean, the core of what Code.org does is to bring innovation into public education, into primary and secondary education. We don't run a school or a university. We don't directly teach students. We provide curriculum to help existing schools modernize their curriculum. And I bring it back to the question I asked, which is that primary and secondary education feels stuck in the past. You know, if you think about the last 40 years, we've seen the rise of personal computers, the internet, the smartphone, artificial intelligence, all the science and efforts behind climate change, space exploration. And meanwhile, if you go to the average high school, what students are learning is the same thing as they were learning 60, 70, 80 years ago. And there's not enough of an effort to change that education system to say maybe some of the things from the past are less relevant. Some of the memorization that students need to do to pass multiple choice questions on a test are less relevant. With the rise of ChatGPT, there's so much that homework that we ask students to do, and they're like, what's the point of doing this? The computer just does it for me. Public education is the only world where you ask people to do something without the internet. Don't talk to anybody else. That's called cheating. Don't use digital tools. That's cheating. You need to do the work without that help. Whereas in the real workplace, you want collaboration. You want use of digital tools, including in universities, to maximize human potential. And I think that changes, part of that changes what we do in terms of bringing computer science into primary and secondary education. But I also think we need the entire system to change to shift not just how we teach, but the purpose of what we teach.
That's definitely something we should all think about, how education needs to kind of catch up with modern day issues that we're facing with modern day technology. I kind of want to set formalities aside with this next question. Obviously, the title of our session is Fostering Youth Voices from Intention to Impact. When you look across the world, around the world, even online, when you look online, there is no shortage of drive within the youth. They're all hungry to succeed. They're all hungry to succeed in different sectors, and they want to make impact. My question is, from your expertise and your insights, where is that gap? Where is the challenge that we're facing when it comes to intention and direct impact within the youth? What can we do to support them? Let's start with Mr. Hadi.
Well, this builds on what I was talking about. I feel like the school system is forcing kids down a path that doesn't actually make sense and leads them educated according to the rules of the past, but not actually employable and not able to make the changes that they want. And increasingly, kids are learning outside of school. My own children are spending so much time personally on YouTube, learning about things that they're personally interested in about. And that's not just my kids. I mean, YouTube is one of the largest educational resources in the world. And it's not that YouTube is bad, it's that schools aren't filling this gap. And so I think that the biggest change we can do is encourage students to chase their passions the way you were talking about at EFE, and to find the resources to get there. I also think human creativity is a very natural drive, and if we reorganize our education to think about what do you want to create a movie, create a book, create a startup, create an app, and learn what you need to do that. The reason you need to learn to read and write is so that you can write a book. You know, the reason to learn digital skills is to create a website, not just because you want to pass a test. Because right now school feels like work, except it's work that doesn't result in any pay. It doesn't result in any fruit, and at the end, the prize actually doesn't feel like it gives anything to students. And I think we should let students chase their passions rather than kind of force them through this meat grinder that feels increasingly like a dead end.
That's wonderful. Mr. Tara, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, I agree with it. So it's one of the most important thing is to unlock the potential of the individuals, because I mean maybe the turn of the 20th century to 21st century, then so all this the world is like becoming more and more individuals taking initiatives, and the society itself, so that the youth could take the initiative by themselves based on their intentions or their wish or their interest. Then to do that, they will need to have some kind of right environment so that they could acquire kind of necessary expertise on their own. So that then the schools or higher education could become a kind of the opportunity for them to get those kind of environments. So like this way, so we need to kind of transform the education system itself to become a kind of a student center.
Okay, so your approach is more letting the student kind of find innovation on their own, trial and error approach.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. I don't want to say we because I mean, you bring in the expertise, but I bring in, I guess, the youth side. But let me ask you, what can the university do in order to inspire the youth, to give them that innovation, to bridge that gap, like we said? From your standpoint, what can you do today?
Yeah. So yeah, in fact, we are in fact planning to set up a kind of new type of college, and then
Okay.
yeah, with that, so it's a completely student-centered curriculum. Then they could they could make their own curriculum based on their interest and based on their intention, so that they could collect all the expertise that they want to. For example, they should have a kind of problem that they want to solve, and so to solve this problem, normally there should be some sort of a disciplinary, I mean, expertise to be involved. So that to do that, they should have a kind of right opportunity to be connected to, or to be able to ask all these professors throughout our, I mean, university, so that it's not really, I mean, trying to confine them into the specific discipline, but also open up the opportunities for them to have an access to all different types of, I mean, the scholarship. So.
Wonderful. Professor, let me ask you, what are the major issues that we're facing now within youth when it comes to intention and then impact? Where do we bridge that area?
Yeah. Perhaps I can give you an example of a social startup and to elaborate on the various sort of mechanisms that we put in place to help students or youths along. So in NUS, we have a general education component. We have a course, communities and engagement. That is a service learning course that also ties in with about 60 to 80 hours of service contributions in various aspects. It can be in Singapore, it can be outside Singapore, all right? And about 6,000 students every year will take that course, and which means that 6,000 multiplied by 60 to 80 hours of service contributions to the society and beyond. So that's one layer of impact. There are many sort of students who have this aspiration that, yes, they want to do something for social good and they want the impact to impact many, many more lives. So we have this example of a startup called Water Roam. Water Roam is actually created by a group of engineers. All right, it's actually a water purification device. All right, they are mindful that clean water is not a given, even in Southeast Asia. They have this device that initially costs about $3,000 to build, that can supply clean water to a village of maybe 25. So if they need more than 25, you work, and it's hand pump. It's hand pump. You can provide water for 25. If you have 50 people, you need 2 pumps, right? So the innovation was refined. We helped them lower that cost because we would have engineers in our minimal viable product group that can actually help with the engineering to help them simplify and to make sure that they are more cost effective, right? Because that, I think, is one important element. Then we help them with the connections. Now, Singapore, we are fortunate to have clean water. So how can we get their innovation to other parts of the world? That's where I think our connections with NGOs, right, an important part of the ecosystem comes into play. We introduced them to many countries. So this company was started in 2014. So it's close to 10 years. They have actually worked with close to 50 NGOs. All right, and they have actually impacted 200,000 people, right? Mostly in Southeast Asia and South Asia. And we are actually continuing to work with them to see how we can actually scale up. And mainly, actually, a lot of this comes through our connections. So, for instance, recently we introduced them to Laos. All right, Laos, we have a program. Laos is a country in Southeast Asia. It's a very poor country. We work with the government of Laos in terms of infectious disease control and general health, right? So we have actually very good connections with the government officials. And usually, in this sort of countries, you need to get the right connector. If you get the right connector, then you can actually push the innovation around. So one aspect of innovation is scaling up innovation. Actually, you need to have important connectors in the various countries. And also depends on what sort of innovations that you're talking about. It's not so simple like you just go into that country, then things are set up. It's never that rosy. So these are some examples. And of course, along the way, because now we have a fairly rich ecosystem, we are able to get the right type of mentors to help them. People who have succeeded or people who actually know certain countries or certain regions very well, who can actually link them up. And the next part is then how can we actually then leverage on the university networks. So if you look at Southeast Asia, right? Southeast Asia, 650 million. It is actually a very promising region in the world, at least in terms of economics, but also in terms of social need, right? And we're actually working with the top universities in Southeast Asia, right? They may not be as mature in terms of entrepreneurship training, especially social entrepreneurship. So what we do is that we actually set up courses for students from the top universities in Southeast Asia. We train them and we say that we can help you with your connections, to implement your social innovation. So these are the various sort of things that we try to do to bridge the gap. But it's still a work in progress because different ecosystems have different complexities, and it's not so straightforward.
I mean, definitely. I think, like you said, the key word is the takeaway. It's a work in progress. But what's important is we're having conversations such as these. I think for me, when I think of intention to impact, what comes to mind is the workforce. For example, so many students intend on being engineers. They study it. So many students intend on being consultants, but they're not met with that in the workforce. So, Mr. Andrew, I want to ask you, how do we bridge that gap when it comes to intention versus impact in the workforce?
Yeah. So I was not asked to do this, but I will commend those who have not spent a little bit of time downstairs looking at some of the information that's been collected to do so, because I think it actually sheds some light on this discussion. There's clearly on display here downstairs a gap between the perceptions of what leadership feel like they're bringing to this and the way youth perceive what is actually happening. And I think looking and trying to understand that gap a little bit more and making sure that youth are brought into the conversations so they are actually not just lip service, but being a part of the conversations, whether it's policy around workforce, policy around education, policy around whatever it might be. So I think that's an important one. I think having the tools available to youth across all sectors to be able to succeed in various sectors in the workforce, this is a resource constraint, and it's going to take a real concerted effort. And you probably see it all the time. That's probably one of the biggest obstacles to getting the computer labs or whatever it is that is required to do that. So I think there's that. I think another aspect to this, though, is we've talked a lot about kind of the reforming of education, whether it's at primary or tertiary level. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing now is the shelf life of education. And for our parents' generation, the shelf life was pretty much their life. They graduated from school and they had the tools and the knowledge they needed to carry them through most of their careers. And in certain sectors, that shelf life has gotten to the point where it might be measured in months. AI probably being the biggest example. So creating ways to have lifelong learners, to have, it's one thing to say we're going to create the mentality to be a lifelong learner, but you also have to have the infrastructure out there for youth and adults, frankly, to be able to continue to learn. So I think those are some of the things that real investments need to be made into. So it's both the intentionality of including youth in these discussions, but also providing the resources there so that they can do so.
Definitely. As promised, I want to give time for audience members to ask questions. So I'm going to pose one last question for our panel members, and then we're going to jump to the audience to hear from you all. Starting with Mr. Hadi, can you give us any final message or any call to action you'd like to leave the audience with right now?
My main thought is that I think we need to rethink education from a top-down perspective. Most people working in education are looking at their little piece, thinking how they can make it slightly better, and not looking at the entire system. I was here last year at Davos, and it was on a panel with all educators in the audience, and one of the panel members asked educators in the audience, how many people here think that the global K-12 education system is servicing students properly and preparing them for the future? And nobody raised their hands. Wow. So everybody working in education has this sense that the global system is not quite doing right in terms of preparing students for the future. But then most of us are working at it in our own little area, incrementally looking for change, rather than just holistically saying, how can we rethink the whole effort we put students through? Mm-hmm. Why do they need to do homework? Why do they need to learn cursive handwriting? You know, everything that we do in education is worth questioning with a question why, to service this broader potential of maximizing human potential and leading from intention to impact.
Definitely. Okay, Mr. Tara.
So I agree. And then on top of it, so basically we will need to transform our education system to be more, student-centered. But at the same time, all this, career design or so their career itself could be also, they should take the initiative to make their own careers. But so far, for example, if you look at the Japanese system, then the big companies are basically recruiting students at the same time, right after the graduation. So that is the system that we are, complying with for now. But I'm always pushing them to change that. So that like this way, so this career itself or society itself should be, changed in a way for the youth could take their initiative to make their own career. So that's my thought.
Wonderful. Yeah. Professor?
Yeah. My phrase would be support your top universities. Because universities are very critical to, initiate change. And they are in a better position to initiate change, right? University, like if you look in US, all right, in the 90s, they were the ones who initiated the mathematics war. Right, go read up from Google what the mathematics. I'm a mathematician, so I know, and that's one sort of worry when you try to actually allow education to be too much bottom up, right, and less top down, and that's what happens in mathematics in the U.S. Right, and which actually the universities, the U.S. university professors actually had a big concern, right? And that's the basis of the mathematics war. But come to my main point, universities are critical, top universities are critical. So please get your government to support the top universities. Please get your donors to support the top universities because they are an important component to drive change.
Mr. Andrew, any final message or call to action? No, honestly, I think this is the perfect place to say any message like that. Mr. Andrew, any last call to action?
I think we've made it through this entire panel and we haven't really mentioned the private sector one time. And so if I had a call to action, it would be, as we're looking at the reform of the education system, so I think there's a lot of unanimity on that, to make sure that we are engaging the private sector in meaningful ways as well, who have the understanding of the skill sets that they're needing to see, and to be able to do that in collaboration, whether it's at university level, secondary, or even primary education. So figure out ways to bridge that gap, which seems to have existed for centuries. So.
Perfect. Okay, now I'm passing the baton on to you. Would anyone like to ask any questions or leave any comment with our panel members? Let's start with you in the front row, please.
Thank you. So my question would be if we take intention to impact and take a little step back to K through 12 with intention, and a lot of people at the age of 17, 18, where they're about to make a choice of where they're going to spend their next 4 to 6 to 8 years learning a subject that's sometimes it is very hard to make that choice. And coming from my country, many people who have finished 4 years of university education are doing something completely different to what they've studied. And if you look at most of the entrepreneurs, they have studied something completely irrelevant to what they're doing. And what would be your recommendation to this young 17, 18-year-old person who has to make this decision of where they're going to direct their life and how they should choose their intention?
Is the question for me?
Yes,
for the panel?
would you like to start, Mr. Hadi?
My first thought is to redirect, as I mentioned earlier, around instead of what do you want to study, to redirect around what do you want to create or what do you want to build. Because students don't really know what they want to study as much, but if you ask them if they want to make a movie, they can quickly think about what kind of movie would they want to make. Or if you ask them to build an app, it's far easier to get a student to think about the exciting app they want to create. Whereas if you ask them, do you want to study chemistry or biology, they're not as sure. It's the motivation of what comes after the thing that you study that drives students. And I think if we redirect education that way, you'll actually have students who are much more passionate about the work that they're doing because they're learning something because the end result they're trying to create.
Yeah. And what problem do they want to solve?
Exactly. What problem do you want to solve?
Exactly.
What social change do you want to enable?
Yeah.
And then learn the things you need in order to do that.
Perfect. For the sake of time, I want to take another question. If there's let's take one from this side of the room. Yes, please.
Hi everyone. Regarding the private sector, I'm not from a private sector. I'm a startup of a founder. But you mentioned at the beginning, like for example, in your university, 95% of your students land a job within the 6 months. But we also know that within the 1 to 3 years, lots of students quit a job in the corporate world, mainly because there's a misalignment on students' values and interests with the corporate culture, right? I do understand that it's not necessary a job of a university to make sure that employers are sustainable, but I would love to understand what is your take on this, how we can change and involve private sector to make sure that the corporate culture is aligned with students' interests and values.
Well, if I may ask, and I have data on my students, looking at student employment just immediately after graduation actually says very little about the quality of your education or the outcomes. All right, the truth is that you should be evaluating 10 years, 20 years to see whether that graduate had actually benefited from the experience or skills that are learned in the university. Right, but it is very often difficult. Right, we can only get glimpses through our alumni who have been successful. All right, less so for the alumni who maybe are not as successful because we don't actually do very longitudinal. The only longitudinal survey that we did was for a very special program, and that was for a program called the University Scholars Program. We take in about 200-300 a year. And 5 years after they have graduated, they said that the hardest course, the course that is most memorable was the hardest course that they took. And that was the course on writing. Right. And on writing, you would assume that people would be able to write, especially university students. but not so. Especially, I think we have a very stringent writing course that, the first few essays that you write will come back with lots and lots of red marks, criticisms and all this, that it totally, deflate the student's ego. But that's the thing that they kept in mind. So for our students, when we look at the survey, yes, they do switch job very fast. They don't stay within 3 years, all right? But in the Singapore context, it's more that they wanted a higher salary. And the best way to get a higher salary is to make a job switch, right? They also ask for things like work-life balance and what have you. And that's something which I think we have taken feedback from our employers, and we are also trying to, in a way, to build some of this so-called advice or guidance in our career preparation programs that we have undergraduate. But again, it's still a work in progress.
Definitely.
It's difficult to understand younger people, and they are different.
Yeah.
They are different, but we have to continue to try to understand them and try to match them.
Yeah. So
Please.
So I don't know if that's statistics is for the globally right or not, but in Japan at least, like a 30% will quit in 3 years, 50% in 5 years, and so on. And then that is, as I have said, due to the kind of synchronized recruitment process, because they will need to, find a job right after their graduation in Japan, mostly, so that they will starting to job hunting, making job hunting in maybe the beginning third grade. So it will take like 1 year or more to get a job. But they are applying so many different companies, and then at the end they will get a couple of promises. And then, so like this way, it's a kind of matching process itself is not really enough. In terms of the duration and so on. So that will make a kind of this mismatch of the job that they wanted to have. So, and then like this way. So I really like the students themselves would like to have their initiative to make their own career itself, rather than following all these big company system for their recruitment. So that's yes. The call for the
I'll just add
call to action.
a couple of quick words, which is I think that the private sector is still learning how to project their values. And 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had this conversation, frankly. Only in maybe certain organizations. But now it is really critical to youth going into jobs to understand that. And so I think there is still that learning process of how do corporations really project that value. And HR people are not necessarily trained in that. That's not what they're looking at. So we have a ways to go. Yes. Okay.
Perfect. I would love to take questions from everyone, but unfortunately we're out of time, and I'm getting the signal to kind of wrap it all up. Please, I implore you, after this session, find our panel members, kind of pick their brains, ask them any questions that you have. You've obviously witnessed that they bring in such wonderful expertises from all around the world under education. So please give them all a round of applause, and thank you so much for this session.
Thank you so much.